My name is Brian Green, and I am the Vice President of Policy Advocacy at the National Association of REALTORS. And the National Association of REALTORS are very happy to be sponsors of this conference, in particular the digital conference that accompanies this. I'm not going to say anything that you aren't hearing in the other sessions here. In part, that's because just so many of us here today are aligned on what Up for Growth stands for. And, I just find that this particular conference is critical because Up for Growth is singularly focused on addressing the barriers to housing underproduction and the barriers to the development of affordable housing throughout our country. We at the National Association of REALTORS are proud supporters of Up for Growth because we've been raising the alarm on these issues for years. You may remember a couple years back, we put out a study that said that the housing shortage in this country was about 5.5 million units right now, and that we were about 20 years behind where we need to be. And we also cited in that report the impact that zoning barriers and other local regulatory restrictions have on the development of this much-needed housing. We were very proud of the response from that report. We're very proud that Brian Deese of the National Economic Council tweeted out that report, and that we've had White House participation in and administration participation in several of our forums on this topic. And we keep talking about it. We just recently issued a report called Double Trouble earlier this year, talking about how this record low inventory was contributing to record high prices throughout the country. And we analyzed the impact in different metro areas throughout the country, highlighting the national nature of this crisis. And finally, we're also concerned about the underproduction of rental housing and the underproduction of affordable multifamily housing as well. We know that the limited supply of multifamily housing and the barriers to where you can build it have contributed to the affordability crisis there. And we also know that the housing choice vouchers that many need in order to afford this housing has not kept up with the need. So that's also critical too. But we are up for growth because we know that everything goes up from growth. We know right now that we have a serious homeownership gap in this country between African Americans and whites, and actually Hispanics and Asians and whites. Each of these groups have significant gaps, where the African American homeownership gap is a 30 percentage point gap. And we know that to close these gaps, we need to address the affordability crisis, the housing supply crisis, the segregation that if we were to address could actually lift the gross domestic product of many metro areas and the country, that we need to build this. We need to address housing instability in order to create a stable foundation for our society as a whole. So these gaps will get worse if we don't address the housing underproduction crisis in this country and the affordability crisis. We're already seeing that. So it's urgent that we address it. I'm glad we have White House engagement on these issues. Several of us in the room had the opportunity to go over to the White House and again raise the alarm on these issues, and we know the White House is listening. But we need to work together and reach up and deal with this issue and at least grab that low-hanging fruit right now, those bipartisan solutions that we can work on together and make some progress on. We need to see the administration move forward on those things that are within its purview to address. But beyond that, we need to also climb up into the tree and reach up for that higher fruit and shake those branches as well. And NAR is up for that as well. So pleased to be a part of this. I was just last night appointed to be on the executive board of Up for Growth Action. So pleased to dig in even further now with many of my friends. And very pleased to be working with Mike Kinsella, who you're going to hear from next, the CEO for Up for Growth, who just has been doing a bang-up job, and just so happy to have him as an advocate on this issue. So with that, Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. I was joking with Brian that one of my least favorite things about these events is sort of clearing the room, getting everybody's attention, and so I have had the joy of Brian taking care of that task for me today, and Bob taking care of that task for me yesterday. So thank you both for your support. Brian, it's a terrific set of remarks and introduction, and thank you for your leadership. We're just so happy and excited. We're thrilled to have you serve on the Up for Growth Action Executive Committee. Really looking forward to your leadership beginning next year. And I really think that this room represents the opportunity that we're here to talk about today. From the National Low-Income Housing Coalition to the National Apartment Association, from Chambers of Commerce to Habitat affiliates and National NeighborWorks supported organizations, this room represents the plurality of stakeholders who are ready to stand behind proposals, both legislative and through the administration, that we are all hearing and seeing in the headlines, and we'll hear more about in Erika's remarks in just a moment. Before I get to introducing Erika, I'd like to also just step aside here. I believe we have a video greeting from the National Apartment Association to share, and we'll continue on with the program. Sorry, National Association of REALTORS. Apologies.
Hello to everyone participating in person and virtually in the Up for Growth Summit for Housing Changemakers. Hi, I am Leslie Ruda-Smith, your 2022 NAR President. Thank you for the opportunity to join you here virtually, and thank you to Up for Growth for holding this invaluable opportunity to meet and collaborate. Today's topics are some of the most pressing issues facing consumers, the housing market, and the broader real estate industry. Summits like this one are prime opportunities for us to investigate barriers blocking access to homeownership, evaluate new ideas, raise pro-housing solutions, and ensure that we remain vigilant when any proposals are implemented to ensure positive outcomes for historically disadvantaged communities. As the market changes and interest rates fluctuate, it's critical that the policies being discussed not only have a long-lasting impact, but provide near-term relief as well. NAR continues to lead many of these discussions with policymakers, industry partners, home buyers, homeowners, and others to reduce housing costs and increase supply. To help address some of the specific supply and affordability challenges, NAR has convened a group of members called a Presidential Advisory Group to examine issues having a significant impact on the market, such as zoning and the growing share of properties being bought by institutional investors. We know some of the largest institutional investors may be limiting the amount of available inventory for purchase by owner-occupied buyers who are facing unprecedented difficulties in acquiring their first home. So we are looking at ways to incentivize sales by these large investors to first-time or first-generation home buyers. Likewise, we must expedite and reduce permit costs to facilitate flexibility for builders looking to fill the gaps in our housing supply. At the same time, we must also address rental affordability so that aspiring homeowners can realize the American dream by saving more money and helping them access innovative and flexible financing solutions. With regard to all of these issues, we are working with Congress and the administration to ensure smart, bipartisan solutions that we put forward. And I look forward to today's keynote speaker updating us on all of these efforts. We know the challenges ahead of us are significant. There are no simple solutions or quick fixes. The only way that we can meet the challenges and demands of the future is by continuing to work together. Up for Growth is leading that charge. We appreciate their proactive work on so many important issues. I thank all of the speakers for joining today's event, and I hope that we can all unite behind supportive reforms to improve the landscape of housing availability and affordability. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules for this critical engagement, and thank you for having me. Together, we can bring it home for our consumers across the country.
One of the aspects that Up for Growth prides itself on is convening leading experts and policy thinkers in the field of housing policy. I'm honored to introduce Erika Poethig, the Special Assistant to the President for Housing and Urban Policy. Erika started her career in housing policy, as far as I can tell, as far back as 1990, working in the city of Chicago on combating predatory lending, preventing foreclosures, and stabilizing communities. She then went on to the Obama administration to work at U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, went on to the Urban Institute, leading the Research to Action Lab in efforts around housing supply in particular, among other things, and now serves in the Biden White House in the Domestic Policy Council, working on housing and urban policy issues. We are so excited to feature Erika to present the leadership that she is engaged in at the federal level as part of the administration, really tackling America's severe underproduction of homes through the Housing Supply Action Plan, along with other measures. So without further ado, Erika, I'd like to invite you up to the stage.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Hello. Thank you, Mike, very much for the invitation to be here today. It's so great to see my many friends in person, current, former colleagues, people who I've been colleagues with in different iterations. Solomon, I'm looking at you. But truly, it's just to be back together in person is a true pleasure. So I think it helps our dialogue, it helps our action too. So thank you for this. Thank you for National Association of REALTORS sponsoring this particular element of the program. Brian, good to see you again, as well as so many other colleagues today. It's great to be in a room with such a powerful network of local, state, and national change makers. It's not a room I'd rather be in at this particular time, and to Up with Growth for your track record of really translating data and evidence into policy change and action, which is a approach near and dear to my heart. So it's through this conference that I think you are demonstrating that land use and zoning reform is a foundational and a bipartisan issue. And we believe, and more importantly, President Biden believes, that housing is a bipartisan issue, especially today when housing supply challenges are felt in almost every community and congressional district in the U.S. It's hard for both homeowners and renters alike, but especially for working families looking for more affordable starter homes that are in such short supply. I'm sure many in this room saw Emily Badger's piece in the New York Times over the weekend. Emily is a friend. I always enjoy reading her pieces, and she just, again, I think hit the nail on the head in terms of what are the dynamics affecting the limited supply of starter homes in this country. And I think that article really points to why they just are not penciling out. And there are a variety of factors, of course, but zoning and land use that keeps lot sizes large and the cost of land high are fundamental reasons why it is hard to find a new starter home in almost any community. Earlier this year, the Biden administration released an action plan to ease the burden of housing costs. It's a portfolio of actions to address one of the largest items in a typical family's budget and one of the largest drivers of inflation in our economy. Now, before I dive in to how we are advancing that plan that we announced earlier this spring, I want to say a few things about our broader economic agenda. When President Biden took office, our economy was in crisis and the pandemic was out of control. Through bold and decisive action, President Biden's economic agenda laid the foundation for the strongest and most equitable economic recovery in modern history, with over 9.7 million jobs and the fastest decline in the unemployment rate on record to 3.7%. The unprecedented shutting down and restarting of the global economy due to the pandemic led to mismatches between supply and demand. That, together with higher energy and food prices resulting from the war in Ukraine, has driven significant global inflation, including here in the United States. That is why today President Biden's top economic priority is bringing down inflation and lowering costs for families, while helping to transition our economy from a historically strong recovery to stable, steady growth. And we are seeing significant progress on that front, but there is also more work to do, particularly in housing prices that are still showing up in our inflation numbers. But President Biden's economic strategy is about both historic recovery and deeper, long-lasting change to ensure an economy that works for working families. At the heart of President Biden and Vice President Harris's economic agenda is that economic growth should reach and uplift all Americans. No community, no individual, no racial or ethnic group should be left behind. Driving the economy from the bottom up and the middle out ensures that growth benefits everyone. Now, as everyone in this room knows, the challenges we face with housing affordability preceded the pandemic. The housing supply shortfall is deep and long-standing, largely resulting from the underbuilding in the decade following the Great Recession. Fewer new homes were built in the decade following the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009 than in any decade since the 1960s. Estimates do vary. I am aware of Up for Growth, and the National Association of REALTORS has their own estimates. We think the U.S. needs at least 1.5 million more homes. This textbook mismatch between supply and demand has meant skyrocketing rents and homeownership becoming increasingly out of reach. The Housing Supply Action Plan that we released this spring includes both legislative solutions to boost housing supply that the administration has already proposed, continues to advocate for, and some of which we are very happy to see have received bipartisan support. The centerpiece of the action plan, though, are new housing supply-related administrative actions that federal agencies are taking and will take in the year ahead and are taking, and we have an announcement that's forthcoming that will share more of our progress on these actions that unfortunately I can't preview with you today, but stay tuned. We strongly believe in these legislative proposals we put forward last year and earlier in the year, but we are looking for every tool the administration has to address the housing supply challenges we face. These combined legislative and administrative actions, along with the current momentum in the market, state and local reforms will help to close the housing supply shortfall in 5 years. we assume. To inform our Housing Supply Action Plan, we've benefited from a lot of research and analysis from our agency partners at Treasury and HUD and FHFA, but also from great research and private market analysts that we meet with every month. In fact, I am missing the monthly homeownership roundtable conversation to speak with you all today, so I'll have to catch up on those market trends when I get back to the office. We met with stakeholders at every point in the development process to better understand the barriers to creating supply in the current market, and we approached the work knowing that the supply challenges affect low-income and communities of color the most, and have developed strategies that advance greater equity. While we are firmly focused on boosting supply, we also continue to advocate for rental assistance and down payment assistance to ensure housing is more affordable for the lowest income Americans and that first-generation, first-time home buyers can access homeownership. Now let me outline the 5 strategies of the plan, beginning with the first, which I think you will all agree is foundational, the land use and zoning reform pillar of the plan. So up with gross research and evidence coupled with other researchers like economist Ed Glazer have demonstrated that zoning reform has wider impacts on the economy. Housing supply constraints like exclusionary zoning laws prevent workers from living in areas with economic opportunities but high housing costs. Employers are forced to operate below their potential because they cannot attract and retain workers. And Glazer estimates that this misallocation costs up to 2% of gross domestic product, or more than $400 billion a year in lost economic output. Our Housing Supply Action Plan highlighted our support for legislative efforts to provide more direct incentives for zoning reform, including resources in Build Back Better, and in our FY23 budget proposal that is still being considered by Congress through a housing supply fund. We've asked Congress to authorize and appropriate resources to channel resources to communities that are taking steps to reform zoning and create affordability. And we are still waiting for Congress to act, but we are not waiting. We continue to move forward with actions that we can take to incentivize zoning and land use reform. So earlier this year, the administration began increasing transportation investments in a manner that can connect and expand affordable housing supply where consistent with current statutory requirements. So I want to give you a few examples of how this is bearing fruit in some of the more recent discretionary grant awards that have been made. So this last year, DOT released 3 funding applications for competitive grant programs totaling about $6 billion in funding that will reward jurisdictions that have put in place land use policies to promote density and rural Main Street revitalization. They get higher scores, essentially, in the process of review. DOT has already started to award grants for some of these programs, particularly the RAISE program, which I think is, if you aren't familiar with it, used to be the Tiger Grants program, but the RAISE program is highly sought after resources because it can be awarded to local jurisdictions. And most of the money for transportation flows through the state. So these are very competitive awards, and as part of the criteria for award, we introduced new language associated with incentivizing efforts for more comprehensive planning that help to increase housing supply. So I want to highlight a few examples where local governments are taking steps to link up improvements to the transportation structure with a range of other kinds of transportation, environmental, urban planning, and housing policy goals. So in Rochester, Minnesota, for example, DOT committed nearly $20 million to the 6th Street Bridge construction project that will build a multi-span bridge on 6th Street to connect the street and trail across the Zumbro River. This project is part of Rochester's 2040 comprehensive plan that calls for a wider range of housing, business location, and transportation options in a series of mixed-use, mixed-density corridors and activity centers where more purposeful integration of land use and transportation occurs to meet the diverse needs expressed by residents and business interests. That's a direct quote from how DOT described why it awarded Rochester, Minnesota, $20 million. In Colorado, DOT provided over $24 million to construct 3 new mobility hubs in Grand Junction, Rifle, and Glenwood Springs. Rifle's 2019 comprehensive plan designates the downtown as high-density residential and neighborhood commercial and notes that the city's zoning standards and incentive policy should focus on encouraging affordability of housing, including allowing for accessory dwelling unit construction by right use in residential zoning districts and incorporating manufactured housing as a viable affordable housing strategy. Again, a direct quote sort of signaling that these are the reasons why, part of the reasons why these grants were selected for awards. So this is one of the ways we are trying to encourage others as they come in for awards to follow the same kind of path. So these linkages, and there's more to come because this is the first of the award opportunities that have been completed. So that's a bit of a taste of what we are doing more explicitly through the bipartisan infrastructure law grants. I will say that in the past, 20% of the resources have been through competitive processes and 80% have flown through formula to state DOTs. The bipartisan infrastructure law has shifted that percentage, and now it's 60% flows through formula and 40% through competitive. The formula piece is still really critical. There are fewer levers to influence what happens to the formula funding, but there will be a rulemaking that happens every time a new authorization bill is passed that will guide and direct the resources that flow through the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. There's new language in the statute that does directly connect housing and transportation planning through the metropolitan planning organizations. It's a new lever. And so we invite, excuse me, I just need to grab some water. Thank you. We invite folks to give us some more feedback, and there will obviously be a comment opportunity to how to think about using that particular lever. The second category or strategy is piloting new financing to fill credit gaps for ADUs, 2 to 4 unit properties, and manufactured and modular housing. So research by Lori Goodman and colleagues at the Urban Institute estimate that we could add 4.7 million units to the housing supply over the next 10 years by improving tools for producing ADUs, accessory dwelling units, manufactured and modular housing, and preserving existing homes at risk of obsolescence. The action plan does introduce some new steps to finance and produce more manufactured housing and ADUs, but I'm also excited to highlight one of the projects that was awarded resources through the Department of Commerce's Build Back Better Regional Challenge. Commerce awarded $1 billion to 21 finalists across the U.S. that are supporting interconnected investments that together could transform their local economy, expand economic opportunity and competitiveness, and create thousands of good jobs. One of those finalists was the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition that received $41 million from the Economic Development Administration earlier this month to accelerate innovation in home building and promote new building techniques in order to lower the cost and boost the supply of affordable housing production. The grant will enable the coalition to become a national leader in using mass timber to accelerate affordable housing production, provide good jobs, and restore forest health. Now, one aspect of this strategy that I found particularly interesting is that one of the things they did was they got the local jurisdictions across the state to amend their zoning so that they are, the whole strategy is to connect the new modular housing production, but also to ensure that the communities have the zoning to accept it as they are having this really virtuous production cycle that also includes a very robust workforce development strategy to enhance economic development, particularly in rural areas. So that is a $41 million billion investment in this strategy that we will watch closely, of course. This builds on other recent actions taken across the administration at HUD in particular, where HUD's recent updates to the Manufactured Housing Code, which will enable more manufactured housing producers to use new and innovative building techniques, in addition to HUD's innovation showcase on the National Mall that happened earlier this summer. Now, the third pillar of the plan focuses on expanding and improving existing financing for multifamily development. Now, over the last year, rents have increased between 14 and 16% over the year, depending upon which rental price index you're looking at. And rental price growth has been very strong and above pre-pandemic levels, which means there's a lot of investment flowing to multifamily rental housing. But more production is needed to make up for more than a decade of underbuilding before the pandemic. And existing programs need to work more effectively and efficiently in order to boost housing production at a pace that will close the housing shortfall in 5 years. That's why the administration has continued to advocate for a range of investments like the expansion and increased allocation of the low-income housing tax credit, which has great bipartisan support, in addition to more federal subsidies for construction and rehabilitation of rental homes affordable to low and extremely low-income households. You may have seen recently that the Treasury Department also announced new guidance on the use of state and local recovery funds to help boost housing supply. Now, while the economics of limited supply may be favorable for multifamily construction at the moment, renters are also feeling the burden of higher prices. The administration remains committed to expanding rental assistance to more income-eligible renters, but also to ensuring that renters are protected in a market where they have very little power. Lastly, well, not lastly, second to last, investor-owned, and you heard about this earlier, and perhaps you've been talking about it in this conference. During the pandemic, many renters sought more single-family homes to rent. One of the dynamics we are seeing in more moderately priced markets is large investor purchases of single-family homes that are being converted to rental housing. We obviously care about the supply of both rental and for-sale housing, and we face supply challenges across the market, but the biggest squeeze is for rent-starter homes. We cannot afford to lose these opportunities for first-time home buyers, so we continue to be focused on ensuring that the government-owned supply flows to owner-occupants and other mission-driven organizations rather than large investors. Lastly, we are clearly facing supply chain issues across many different aspects of the economy. For housing, this includes materials and labor supply needed to help turn the record number of homes under construction into completed homes where Americans can live. We're very pleased to see the cost of lumber come down close to pre-pandemic levels, but we continue to monitor other inputs to housing construction that may face supply chain challenges. Labor is obviously an ongoing challenge, and I'm excited by the efforts like those in Oregon that I cited earlier that are linking the economic development sort of in this virtual cycle, new forms of housing, workforce training, to create a holistic ecosystem that addresses the housing needs but builds a pipeline of jobs for people in this growth industry. We think there's a lot to like in this agenda, and we continue to pursue it, but we also remain very open to other feedback and other ways we can take action. The door is not closed on that, and I'm so excited to be in this venue and this conversation with you all today to hear more of those ideas because it is a collective challenge and one we need to solve together to close the housing supply gap. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and welcome your questions and your ideas. Thank you.
Hi there. Yeah, we're going to be taking questions. Please give your name and where you work before you ask any. So I'll be walking around with my colleague Erika. Just raise your hand.
Hi, Erika. Thank you so much for a great presentation. I'm Catherine Burgess, and I'm with Smart Growth America and Locus. We advocate for sustainable, equitable, transit-oriented development, so we're very excited about all the connectivity with housing and transportation in the Housing Supply Action Plan. I've got a question on a topic that is not as thoroughly addressed. There's been many strides with this administration on recognition of climate risk and on climate adaptation. I was curious how you see the Housing Supply Action Plan addressing, how to protect people in communities or locations which are more susceptible to the impacts of climate change, whether that's flooding, sea level rise, heat, drought. So I'd like to hear a bit about that, thinking about how to direct growth to locations which are likely to have the best prospect of protection over the longer term.
Thank you for that question. And you are right. The Housing Supply Action Plan does not directly address that aspect of the production of supply. And we continue to work closely with our colleagues in the Climate Policy Council and across the administration around the linking up and aligning those particular strategies, but not prepared to address that question directly today.
Hi, Erika. I'm Megan Booth with the Manufactured Housing Institute. Very excited about everything you had to say about manufactured and modular housing. We do think there's a lot of opportunities there. I wanted to ask a couple questions. One about hoping we can see more, and I'm looking forward to it. Sounds like maybe you're going to have some rulemaking coming out about how to use those federal levers to move the zoning processes in a lot of communities. We know there's a lot of programs the government does. The stuff you're doing in transportation is great. We think there's a lot more that HUD can do with some of their programs as well, and we hope to see more of that. But more specifically, I wanted to ask you, I know there's a White House task force on manufactured housing. Do you know what the timing is on a report coming out from that group?
I don't.
Okay.
Erika? Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Marguerite Pridgeon, Corporation for Supportive Housing. I just wanted to follow up on a lot of the discussions today about home ownership and the pathway to home ownership. Housing preservation is another area that I'm not hearing a lot about other than the climate change resources provided through IRA, and I'm wondering if there's something else that is being done by the administration to ensure that, once people get to that path and they actually have their homes, how they can preserve ownership, and as well as people who currently are in affordable homes, what other than, getting energy efficient, resources to help lower costs is being done to help them preserve affordability?
So thank you for that question. And one of the things I didn't talk a lot about in these remarks today, because I was focused on supply, was the extraordinary efforts that the administration and all our agency partners went to great lengths at the beginning of the administration to preserve homeownership by helping homeowners refinance, use loss mitigation strategies that were lessons learned from the last financial crisis to preserve homeownership in a way that did not happen in the last crisis. And so through certainly the $10 billion appropriated by Congress is one feature of that, but also FHA, VA, USDA, FHFA all align their policies on loss mitigation to ensure that homeowners that had taken advantage of mortgage forbearance were essentially offered new loans with a lot of with up to 25% payment reduction in order to support their ability to preserve their homeownership. I think we are under discussions now just in the administration. There again continue to be lessons learned. We learned a lot from the research from the last financial crisis about how important deeper payment reduction is. And have applied those lessons and hope that will help to sustain the equity that people built through homeownership and have come out of this crisis. But also how much we can apply some of those loss mitigation processes that were COVID related into general loss mitigation processes. So that, I would say, was a critical part in terms of the preservation of homeownership and continues to be on our screen. I will say another aspect of preservation, I think, is also the reinvestment in existing housing stock and making that available. I didn't talk too much about it today, but part of the Housing Supply Action Plan does feature a number of different steps the administration is taking to improve the financing and availability of financing to preserve 2 to 4 unit homes that are oftentimes important source of rental housing, but also for owner occupants entering home ownership to both own and then rent. And so we know that there's a capital constraint often for home buyers looking for that kind of capital, and we're certainly working on addressing those.
Hi, Cindy Chetty, National Multifamily Housing Council. First of all, I just want to thank you, and we're very lucky to have you at the White House, as well as Solomon, at HUD, people that really understand this, so thank you for what you do. One of the things we've been and also I want to just kudos to this administration, because this, for all the years I've been doing this, the coordination between the various departments is so fundamental to addressing these issues. And you all are working across HUD and transportation and commerce, and it really is impressive. Thank you for that. Lastly, we've talked before about things, when you're building an affordable community, it has layered financing. It has very different regulatory agreements. And we've talked about, many of us have worked for years to try and figure out how we can streamline that process. And I know it's something that's it's important to this administration as well. Can you tell us anything about what the I think you did a great job when you had the guidance on ERAP that went out for states, but are there other efforts afoot to streamline that process?
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. A really important question. It is a feature of the Housing Supply Action Plan that honestly, we had great listening sessions, and I think really took in a lot of terrific ideas. We talked, for folks' awareness, I think we had 5 different listening sessions, and we talked to people across the development process, hearing things like subsidy layering review, really coordinating, building off of the good work done in the Obama administration, where agencies coordinated and made some headway on aligning strategies, and doing that more in the financing space. So we continue to work to advance that agenda. I don't have any more details to share with you today. I do think one of the things we're looking at and seeing, and would love, again, continued feedback here is important in terms of how to prioritize what is ultimately, it's like one of the naughtiest challenges, because it takes a lot of sustained time and commitment among a lot of people to do. But I think one area that we see some promise in is some states have taken steps to do common applications for both tax credits and subsidy. And we think that those kinds of coordination efforts at the state and sometimes the local level, but sometimes it's a state with the localities combining all that funding, is definitely one important step that has helped to accelerate production. Because as you and all the folks in this room know, HUD's funding flows through formulas to states and localities. The tax credits go to the state. We're allocating very little of this at the federal level. And ultimately, to some extent, it does come along with how to incentivize states and localities to do that kind of coordination and putting the funding together, so that developers aren't going like door to door to door, which we totally understand is time consuming and inefficient. And whatever we can do to try to support that kind of state coordination with localities, I think we are on board with and welcome ideas about how to achieve. Thank you. I think I'm at time. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Thank you. Thank you.